We're back. CBS Mornings Plus. Let's talk about the National Guard deployments. They are on duty across Washington, D.C. You know that. Well, the president is now threatening to deploy the Guard to other Democratic-led cities like Baltimore, Chicago, and New York. And the president says it's in response to what he calls a crime emergency, plural, actually. Well, the governors of these states on the president's list are they're pushing back. And by the way, the timing is interesting. It comes as Trump signs an executive order to create new National Guard units to crack down on what the White House says are civil disturbances. Now, the history is also interesting. We have to go back 60 years to find another time when the National Guard was federalized against the wishes of a state governor. President Lyndon B. Johnson deployed troops to protect civil rights protesters marching from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. So here to talk about all this, where things are, where they might be going, is Democratic Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. Congressman, thank you very much for joining us this morning. Because Baltimore is in your state, although not in your district, and it's been floated as one of these states where the Guard, or one of these cities where the Guard could enter, have you heard anything on that front?
Well, people are concerned because there's plainly no public emergency that would justify this. And in the past, overwhelmingly, when the National Guard has been federalized, it's been because the people in the states have asked for it. There's some natural disaster, there's some emergency that requires it. And you hear from the governor, you hear from the mayors, you hear from the people of the state. And here we have just the reverse, where the governors, the mayors, the council people, the community groups are saying, there's no emergency. What are you talking about? What is this all about? And so, you know, the suggestion is basically that the emergency is a public relations crisis relating to the Epstein files. And that's what the genesis of this whole military maneuver across the country is all about.
But Congressman, talk to me about this no emergency idea, because Mayor Brandon Johnson of Chicago, it stood out to me that yesterday he said, we need federal resources to help with public safety, no question about that. And the murder rate in Baltimore is higher than in Chicago. So clearly there is an issue. It's been chronic for a long time. Is there no way that Baltimore or that the state of Maryland at large could benefit from some federal help? And is there a compromise that you could find to take it?
Well, of course, Baltimore and Maryland and every city and state in the country could benefit from real federal state cooperation. That's the way American federalism is supposed to work. That's what we used to do. That's why we have members of Congress sent from the states to Washington to discuss all of these things. But what I'm hearing from the mayors and the governors is what makes common sense. They're saying, why don't you give us the hundreds of millions of dollars in criminal justice grant aid that was canceled by DOJ at the Department of Justice? We're talking about money that was going directly to local police departments, to victim rights organizations, to assist domestic violence victims and so on. And they just canceled it. And nobody's even been able to explain why. In D.C., Trump and the Republicans in Congress impounded $1 billion of locally raised revenue that they were going to spend on criminal justice and on, public education. So there's a lot that can be done, but it's not through sending in the National Guard.
But so then if the message is, we don't want you to help in this way, why don't you tell the administration, but we do want your help in this way and offer a counter plan, and then it's a win-win politically for everybody?
And that's exactly what's happening all across the country. I mean, the people in D.C. started it by saying, hey, if you really want to help us out, that's great. Don't lecture us about graffiti, and they're not even erasing graffiti anyway. Give us the $1 billion that you confiscated of locally raised revenue. And it was the same thing in California. Now it's the same thing in Chicago, where you had the entire, congressional delegation, the U.S. senators, the governor, the attorney general coming and saying, don't send the National Guard in here in order to provoke some kind of violent confrontation. That's the opposite of what we need. And remember, these are cities that are experiencing dramatic drops in crime. D.C. is at a 30-year low in terms of crime. It's gone down 25% in the last couple of years. Chicago and Baltimore have both had dramatic drops in the homicide rate. And so there's some suggestion that Trump just wants to take credit for what's already happening.
I want to get into the legality of this, Congressman. Maryland Governor Westmore, he's called this potential mobilization of the National Guard troops a scare tactic. So I want to tap into your background as a constitutional lawyer. Under the Constitution, is there anything that they can do to stop him?
Well, the Constitution says that Congress can call forth the militias in order to suppress insurrections, which is, of course, precisely what Donald Trump did not do on January the 6th, 2021, to repel foreign invasions and to enforce the law. But the states are not asking for this kind of help. There's lots of help they're asking for in terms of environment, in terms of investment in infrastructure, in terms of investment in criminal justice, including just giving the funds that had been promised before. But nobody's asking for the deployment of the National Guard. And you can see from the D.C. case, they were basically hanging around Union Station and the Washington Monument. They didn't really have anything to do. And remember, they're not trained to do law enforcement. They're trained to fight wars. That's what they're there for. And so Trump is really obliterating the traditional distinction between having an army for the purposes of military and national security versus ordinary law enforcement.
I hear you loud and clear that you don't like the tactics and you don't want the guard, but I do want to hear more about the counter plan, because I know crime goes up, crime goes down, it's falling, it's not, this tactic's working or not. It's been a chronic problem in big American cities for a long, long time, under Democrats, under Republicans, you name it. So what's your wish list in Maryland and for the city of Baltimore to help combat it?
Well, let's start with this. 50% of the firearms that are recovered in homicide investigations in Baltimore come from out of state. So in 2013, we passed the Maryland Firearm Safety Act, which banned assault weapons and imposed like a strict regulation of guns and gun dealers to make sure that we could get a hold of this, outrageous gun violence problem. Well, the guns are flowing in from other states. What we need is a national plan, and that would be a universal violent criminal background check. The Brady Law is working, except it's filled with a lot of loopholes at this point. People are getting guns online. People are getting guns at gun shows. People are engaged in so-called private sales. What we need to do is to say that nobody should get a gun unless they've gone through a violent felon background check first. That's supported by more than 90% of American people, but Trump and the NRA have been blocking that. So that's one very significant step that could be taken to dramatically lower the gun violence and the homicide rate in small towns, big cities, suburbs across America.
All right. Well, Congressman Jamie Raskin, I really appreciate your time today. That was
You bet.
today's
Thanks,
By the Way.